In the winter of 1887, lumberjacks in the frozen woods of Michigan worked the pine forest by day and stayed together in their camp building by night. At first, it was only the silence of snow and wind. Then came tracks too long for any wolf and cries in the dark that carried two voices at once. By the time men began to disappear, the truth of what was hunting them was already closing in. So, before we continue, please make sure you subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks. I was hired as a sawyer in the winter of 1887 when the snow still stood hard over Wexford County and the creeks were frozen solid. Our camp stood near a cedar swamp a few miles off the main road. We cut white pine and hemlock trees and moved them by sled to the landing area. The company gave us rough blankets, a bed, and $20 a month with meals. We moved in with the crosscut saws, axes, peavies, and a stove for the camp building that smoked on a calm day. The oxen made noise in the morning, and the teamster cursed through a scarf. Cold air cut the mouth and made every breath sting. I had worked other camps, but the swamp here held a stillness that pressed on the ears. Our foreman was Harland Pike. He was square-shouldered, quiet, and he kept order by standing where trouble might start. No card games after 10, no alcohol, not even a sip. He said he would dock any man's pay for a broken tool handle if the break was from carelessness. He paired me with Tom Voss on a 6-foot saw. Voss had a strong back and a bad habit of talking through the work. Eli Sturgis bunked near the stove, an older worker with a steady cut and a small worn Bible he kept folded in shirt cloth. Baptiste Clare was our best riverman, short and quick with a scar at his jaw. Eeyore drove the oxen and knew their moods. Silas Shaw checked the trap lines and brought in meat when the company pork turned bad. Jude was the youngest, lean and eager, new to a full season. We built the camp building in 2 days, rough plank walls and a high roof to let smoke out. The cook, Nels, boiled coffee that tasted of iron and poured it black. He kept beans on the back of the stove and said little. We worked from first light. The snow carried us well over frozen bumps. When the wedges cracked through a tree trunk, the sound ran clean through the air. At noon, we ate salt pork and bread with a crust that was hard to chew. By the second week, our landing area was stacked neat, and Pike said we would make our goal if no thaw came on too fast. Trouble did not announce itself with a shout. It crept in through small things, and some men saw it before others. On a Thursday, Silas found a deer torn half through in the cedar line. The body hung in the branches of a low tree, as if placed there by a hand that did not care if it fell. The ribs were cracked open. No tracks circled it in a way that told a clear story. Silas crouched over the sign and touched one mark in the snow. He said no wolf made that. He pointed out the stride. It was long and set in a pattern he could not name. Pike said a bear had stood up and stepped downward. Silas shook his head and cut his answer short. We hauled the day's logs with our thoughts turned inward. That night the wind stopped and the swamp lay still. We lay in the bunks with our boots by the stove. A sound rose from the low ground and carried into the roof beams. It was not one clean howl. It held a low note under a higher cry, both at once, as if one throat held two voices. Men pushed up on their elbows and listened. Voss laughed once and said a sick wolf had found breath. Eli did not speak. He held his Bible to his chest and breathed slow. I felt my neck muscles tighten. There was a dog in camp, a spotted mutt we called Blue, and he started whining until Nels kicked the floor near him and told him to hush. Work the next day went as usual, but Silas came back from his trapline with one sprung and bent. He swore he had set it clean and tight. The bait was gone, and the chain had cut a groove in the sapling from strain. He said he had never seen a trap warped that way without teeth or claw marks to match. Pike told him to reset farther north. The air held a smell near the cedar edge that did not fit the place. It was sharp and old and turned the stomach in a small way. The men did not mention it out loud. We watched the tree line too often and swung the saw with uneven rhythm until Pike snapped us back into pace. The second night, the sound came again. It ran closer, then far off, then close. Blue scratched at the door. Joy sat up and set a hand to his boot. He muttered a name and then caught himself. The stove ticked. When the sound passed, men lay down again, but no one fell into deep sleep. I counted breaths until they evened out. When I finally slipped under, I dreamed of footsteps moving where the roof beams met, steady and measured. I woke with the taste of iron in my mouth. In the morning, Blue was gone. The rope we tied to the bunk post lay torn, not cut. There were drops in the snow that froze into red glass under the morning light. They led 5 paces and stopped. Voss said the dog had pulled hard and scraped his paw raw and gone off on a female dog's scent. He grinned, but it held strain. Jude asked if we should look for him. Pike told him to eat and haul. He said no one left the cutting area for a dog. I felt anger climb my chest. Then it cooled. I knew Pike was not wrong for a foreman. Still, the empty space beside the camp building door made the place feel open to danger. At noon, Ayor told us in a low voice that he had seen something on the main road at first light. He had gone out to check the sled runners. He saw a tall shape cross the empty path where it cut between the spruce trees. It moved upright. It turned its head once. He said he saw ears rise from the skull. He held his hands apart to show the width of the shoulders. His hands shook. Voss told him he had seen a man in a fur cap. Ayor said the arms reached below the hip in a way that did not fit a man. He swallowed and looked down at his food. That evening, Pike walked the edge of camp with Silas. He came back with a flat face and told us to stack more wood inside. He did not say why. When we went to close the door at lights out, we saw 4 deep marks in the plank near the latch. They cut clean through the wood grain and stood at the height of a man's chest. The wood curled outward along each groove. Pike ran his thumb in one groove. He said a porcupine had tested the salt from our hands. No one answered. Eli laid his Bible under his straw mattress and set his boots close, as if he meant to move fast before his eyes fully opened. The next day, Silas asked for help to check the northern trap line. I went with him. We moved past the cedar stand where he had found the deer. The air was still. The snow held our steps in a soft crunch. He showed me a spot where 2 prints had sunk deep and the rest had barely marked the crust, as if weight had shifted forward for a leap. The prints were long. The heel was narrow and the 4 parts spread where weight touched. There were no claw points where I expected them, only pressure lines. Silas did not name it. He said we should turn back. On the way in, we passed a fir tree with bark stripped in 4 long lines from shoulder height to above a man's reach. The sap bled. I measured the height with the handle of my axe. It went above it by 2 hands. By dusk, the sky clouded and held a pale lid over the trees. Nels set venison stew on the table, dark and thick. The men ate in silence. When the stove popped, every head turned. Jude asked if the company would move us south if the thaw came. No one answered. After we lay down, the sound came again, closer than before, and a second voice rose under it, lower and rougher. It circled the camp once, and then stood still beyond the building wall. Boards creaked. A breath moved under the door and carried the same sharp and old smell from the cedar edge. Someone threw up into his blanket and then covered it up. The morning brought clear light and a bitter cold. The marks on the door were deeper. The latch had a new bend in it. Outside, the outhouse door hung on one hinge, and the post it had been tied to showed teeth marks that were not from a bear. The oxen shifted and rolled their eyes. Ayor stood with them and spoke in a low voice. Pike called us to work with a tone that told us not to ask questions. We walked to the cutting area with a sense that the road behind us had changed in some way. We fell into the rhythm of the saw and tried to drive our thoughts into the teeth. The tree groaned and came down straight. It felt good to stand over clean work. But when we trimmed the trunk, Jude called out from the far side. A track had crossed the bed of needles while we worked. It placed 1 foot on the clean wood and stepped off again. The print stood clear in the sap. It held the same long heel and spread 4 parts. Men gathered and breath steamed over the mark until it blurred. Pike sent us back to the hall. He told Jude to keep eyes on the ground and the branches both. Near dusk, Silas did not return on time. He had gone to check the trap lines beyond the cedar hill with Baptiste. Baptiste ran in near dark with his cap off and his breath gone. He said he had lost sight of Silas at the edge of the swamp when the light went flat. He had heard a sound in the brush that he did not know. He had called, and Silas had not answered. Pike pulled on his coat. He told 5 men to bring lanterns. He told Nels to keep the stove hot. He looked at me and said to take the back end of the line. My mouth went dry. I nodded and checked the oil in my lamp. We set off with 6 men and 3 lanterns. Pike took the front with Baptiste at his shoulder. I walked behind them with Jude. Voss and Eli brought up the rear. The night had no wind. The snow made a thin grinding sound under our boots. We passed the cedar hill. and moved into the darker ground beyond it. Pike lifted his hand now and then, and we stopped so he could listen. The lanterns threw small circles of light and left everything else dull and uncertain. Baptiste kept glancing left, as if he expected a shadow to separate and move. At the edge of the swamp we found Silas's trail, where it ran straight for a while and then shifted. It began to wander, as if he had changed his mind or seen something he meant to check. Pike crouched and traced a line with his glove. He pointed to a scuff where the heel had slipped. He did not say more. We followed the marks as they swung toward a fallen tree. There we found his cap pressed into the snow. A smear ran 4 feet and stopped. Baptiste stood over it with his mouth open. Jude swallowed and tightened his grip on the lantern handle. We spread out in a careful line and moved beyond the fallen tree. There were 2 sets of tracks then. One was Silas's, the other was set down far apart, deeper at the front. They came from the side and joined his path. The snow was packed where they met. A few short steps later, the marks grew shallow, and then Silas's steps cut off. The ground showed a channel where weight had pushed through and lifted again. Pike walked the next 10 feet without speaking. The second track curved away. There were drops on the crust that had turned dark and hard. He touched one with the back of his glove and then stood. He said we were going back. Baptiste's face worked. He said he had left Silas only for a minute. He said he had turned because he heard movement behind him, and then nothing. Eli told him to hold his tongue until we were inside. Pike set a hand on Baptiste's shoulder and then took it away. We kept the lantern shaded on the walk-in. Once something moved through the brush 30 yards out and stopped when we stopped. The snow held a faint crunch and then no sound. Jude breathed through his mouth. Voss muttered that it was a moose that had lost its herd. No one answered him. Back at the camp building, Pike counted us twice. He told Nels to put coffee on the table and told the rest to sit. He said no one was to go out alone until first light. He set watches at the door in pairs. I took the second turn with Jude. Before we lay down, Eli asked Pike if he would lead morning prayer. Pike shook his head and said Eli could do it at the table before work. Eli nodded and did not press. During the first watch, a sound moved across the roof. It was a slow weight that tested the beams and then lifted. Snow slid down from the edges. Voss and Eeyore stood by the door with axes in hand. They looked at each other, and then at the ceiling. The sound passed. In the quiet after it, we heard a low breath near the wall by the stove, and then a light scrape against the filling between the logs. Eli whispered a line from his Bible and fell silent. When my turn came, I felt my hands tremble and pressed them to my thighs until the feeling eased. Jude kept his eyes on the latch. He asked me if this was a man's work. I said I did not think so. He asked if it would come through the door. I said the bar would hold long enough for a cry. He nodded and adjusted his coat. An hour passed with nothing more than the stove ticking and the wet breathing of sleeping men. Near the end of our watch, a shape moved past the frosted window. It blocked the small light coming through the ice. It paused and turned. The frost thinned where breath touched it from outside. Jude raised the lantern and the shape slid away without a sound. We did not wake the others. We did not speak. When Voss and Eeyore relieved us, Jude only said the hours had been quiet. At daybreak, Pike gathered us and spoke plain. He said Silas was gone. He said we would search again when the light grew full, but we would not split into single men. He said we would work after that if the search turned up nothing. He said the company did not pay us to stare at trees. His voice had an edge I had not heard before. It sounded forced, as if he fought something under it. Eli opened his Bible and read a short passage in a flat tone that did not slow the room. Baptiste did not eat. Nels put a bowl in front of him anyway and pushed his spoon into his hand. We took to the line in 2 groups. Pike led one with Baptiste, Eeyore and Voss. Eli, Jude and I led the other. We walked along the swamp edge where we had found the tracks. The morning light gave us better sight of the ground and the tree trunks. We found where the other track had crossed a narrow run of water. The prints were deeper on the near bank and light on the far, as if the thing had cleared distance without effort. Voss stood with his hands on his hips and looked up at the branch above the run. It was cracked and hanging. He looked down again and closed his mouth. We found no sign of Silas beyond that. The snow held a few dark drops and then nothing. We circled until noon and then cut back to camp by a longer road. Along the way, we found one of Silas's traps 30 yards off the line, snapped and folded in on itself. The chain was kinked. The bait stick was split. Eli picked up the trap and turned it in his hands. He said no man had done that with fingers. He set it down and wiped his palms on his coat. When we reached the camp building, Pike's group had already returned. Baptiste stood by the door with his shoulders up and his eyes on the ground. Or sat on a sled runner and ran his thumb along a groove. Pike said they had found nothing but more crossings and old sign. He said we would keep the oxen closed and the doors barred after dark. He told us to work the near stand for the afternoon to keep hands busy. We cut at a half pace. No one spoke unless it was to mark a step or call the fall. The lines of our saws grew uneven when the sound from the swamp broke through the steady rhythm. It was not loud. It was a low call close to the ground and answered by a second call farther back. It had a measured rise and fall that matched no animal I knew. Jude's blade slipped and bit into his glove. He hissed and shook his hand. Blood spotted the snow at his feet. He wrapped a strip of cloth and set his jaw. By sundown, the sky showed a thin band of clear light in the west, then went dull again. We brought in wood and water and moved the sleds into a close ring near camp. Pike set a rope from the camp building door to the cookhouse so no one would lose the path in case the light went out. He told Nels to bank the stove low and to keep coffee on. He set watches again, longer this time, and posted Baptiste with Eli. He put Voss with me and kept Jude inside to rest his hand. Gaisor took a double turn by his own choice. The first part of the night held. The second watch broke on a sound at the oxen. They shifted and blew through their nostrils. One let out a strained low sound that pulled every man to his feet. Pike lifted the bar and cracked the door. Cold came in with a thick smell of hide and dung, and something musky. He signaled with 2 fingers. Voss and I went out with him. We moved slow along the sled rope. Our boots sank and squeaked. The lantern light caught steam off the animals. Their eyes rolled white. We saw it then beyond the near sled. It stood upright at the edge of the circle, still as a stump. The lantern did not reach its face. I could see the line of a muzzle and the rise of ears. The shoulders were heavy. The arms hung long. The hands were not paws. They opened and closed once with a dry sound. When it turned its head, the lantern caught the shine in its eyes for a single moment. They reflected a flat color without warmth. Behind it, shapes moved between the trees. I counted 2 and then a third, each low and careful. Pike raised the axe handle in his left hand. He spoke without lifting his voice. He told us to step back to the door. He said not to run. The thing took a step that ate distance and then stopped as if testing our reaction. Baptiste shouted from the camp building to hold. Eli called a warning. The oxen bumped the sled and one fell to one knee, then scrambled up. The thing's head turned toward the sound and then back to us. It breathed out and the air clouded. It stepped aside and disappeared beyond the lantern's reach. We backed to the door and slid inside. Pike dropped the bar. The room held a tight silence broken by 2 quick breaths and then stillness. Chaos' hands shook and he set them under his thighs. Jude stared at the floor. Voss let out a long breath and did not notice the sound he made. Eli closed his eyes and nodded once, as if receiving a fact he had waited on. The oxen settled after a long hour. No attack came. At dawn we found the near sled scraped by deep lines that ran side by side along the beam. The yoke pin on one pair had been tested and turned halfway. There were prints at the edge of the ring. The same long heels with spread foreparts were set down in patterns that made a broken oval around the animals. Farther off we found where one of the shapes had knelt. The mark showed an impression of weight on the knee. The snow there was melted and refrozen. Pike looked at that and did not speak for a long time. He called us in and said we would move camp to the landing by noon. He said we would work from there and leave the swamp edge alone. He told us to pack tight and leave nothing that could be used by an animal. He said we would bring the oxen in close and set a watch through the day as well. Voss started to argue about the time lost. Pike cut him off with a look. Baptiste began to move without a word. We packed through the morning. Jude rolled blankets with his bandaged hand and kept his eyes on the door. Eli wrapped the Bible in his shirt cloth and tucked it inside his coat. Nels tied sacks and lifted the kettle with both hands. Hare kept a hand on each ox and spoke to them in a low voice. I carried saws and peavies to the sled and checked the teeth out of habit. The work steadied me, but only on the surface. We set off in a line with the sleds creaking. The path to the landing cut through a stand of spruce and then over a shallow rise. The trees there stood close and blocked the side view. Pike walked ahead with his axe in his right hand. Baptiste and I took the first sled. Voss and Eli followed with the second. Jude and Eeyore kept the oxen in step. The sound of the runners on the crust covered the small sounds in the brush. Twice I thought I heard footsteps that matched our pace and then fell back. I did not speak. The rise ahead felt farther than I remembered. We reached the top and saw the opening beyond. The landing lay below with the river channel a dark line under the snow. Relief moved through the group in small signs. R eased his shoulders. Jude breathed out. Voss rubbed his hands together. We started down the slope. The first sled jerked hard to the left. Something had caught the runner. I looked back and saw a line of prints that came in at an angle and then crossed our track. The oxen balked and then surged. The second sled bumped and tilted. Eli stumbled and went to one knee. He cried out once. 3 shapes broke from the trees at our right and came in fast and low. I saw shoulders, heads, and arms reaching. Pike shouted and ran at them with the axe raised. I dropped the PV and grabbed Eli by the coat. His leg dragged. He yelled that his ankle had twisted. Baptiste swung his hook and struck one shape across the forearm. It pulled back with a quick sound and then came on again. Its hand opened and closed with a dry snap. Its teeth showed when it pulled its lips back. It reached for the oxen. Eeyore brought the butt of a yoke pin down on its head. The sound was flat and heavy. The shape reeled and recovered. A second one took the far side and set a hand on the sled beam. It tested the weight and then pushed. The beam cracked. Pike struck down and his axe buried to the handle in a shoulder. The shape yanked back and the axe tore free with a wet pull. It turned with a sudden pivot that showed the muscles in its back working under the hide. It reached and Pike stepped away quick and controlled and set the blade in its ribs. It fell to one knee, then pushed itself up with both hands. Its eyes met mine for a heartbeat. There was intent in them, not anger. It looked from me to the oxen, and then beyond me to something else. Then it dropped its head and charged. The charge broke through the sled beam and sent the oxen stumbling forward. The line snapped. The animals bolted down the slope with the sled behind them. Baptiste shouted and tried to grab the trace, but it whipped past his hands. The sled bounced and scattered tools across the snow. The sound of the runners faded into the open ground below. Pike stood braced, blood on his coat, his axe high. The wounded shape pulled itself back and moved into the trees with a heavy stagger, but the other two pressed closer. Eli clung to me, his ankle twisted and swollen. His face was gray and he gasped between words. Voss dropped beside us and lifted Eli's arm over his shoulder. "Get him up," he said. His tone was clipped without panic. Together we dragged Eli toward the second sled, while Jude shouted for Eeyore to hold the team steady. The oxen pawed and tossed their heads, sensing the weight of what pressed in. Their eyes rolled and steam poured from their nostrils. One of the shapes lunged at Baptiste. He struck it across the jaw with his hook, and the teeth of the iron tore grooves that leaked dark blood. The thing staggered, then snapped its head back with a cracking sound. Its mouth opened, and it made a sound that vibrated low in the chest. The third shape circled behind. Pike barked Baptiste's name. Baptiste wheeled just in time, but the shape came in under his swing and caught his shoulder in its grip. He cried out, the sound sharp and ragged. The creature lifted him half off his feet. Its other hand clamped his wrist. Bones shifted under the pressure. Baptiste kicked hard, landing blows against its middle. It did not let go. Pike closed in fast. His axe came down in a wide arc, sinking deep into the creature's side. It let out a choked grunt and released Baptiste, who collapsed to his knees. Pike ripped the axe free and struck again. This time the blade split bone. The shape collapsed forward, limbs twitching. Its breath whistled once and stopped. The smell that rose from its body was foul and thick, sharper than wet dog, stronger than any dead animal I had cut near. Pike stepped back, panting, his face tight and pale beneath the blood. The second shape closed on Voss. It moved with startling speed, faster than the eye wanted to follow. Voss dropped Eli and swung his saw handle up like a staff. The thing caught the wood in its hands. The crack of splintering echoed off the slope. Voss cursed and fell back, fumbling for the axe at his belt. Jude ran in with a peavey and drove the spike into the creature's shoulder. It howled and turned on him. Its arm lashed out. striking Jude across the chest. He flew back into the snow, wheezing, the air knocked clean from his lungs. I felt my legs shake but moved forward with Eli still clutching at me. Hale freed one of the oxen and drove it forward with a shout. The beast lowered its head and thundered straight into the creature's side. The impact knocked it down. The ox trampled once before bolting off in fear. The creature rolled snarling, then righted itself with shocking ease. Its eyes glowed in the lantern light that swung from Eor's belt. They fixed on him, unblinking as it crouched low, ready to spring again. Pike shouted for us to fall back to the landing. He swung his axe in warning arcs, forcing the creature to hesitate. Baptiste stumbled forward, clutching his mangled shoulder, his face pale with shock. Voss half-dragged Eli, who groaned with each step. Jude had gotten to his knees, gasping for air, but pushing himself up. Eor kept one hand on the last ox's yoke, steadying it, his knuckles white. We moved down the slope, our backs never turned fully to the threat. The creature followed, slow and deliberate, as if it knew we could not outpace it. Every few steps it rose tall, towering above us, then dropped low again. Its breath steamed heavy in the air. Pike glanced back, judging distance. His jaw clenched. He stopped and swung his axe low across the snow, throwing up a spray of white. The sound made the creature pause. It tilted its head, studying us with that flat, reflecting gaze. Then, without sound, it turned and vanished into the line of spruce at the slope's edge. We did not believe it gone. Every man's ears strained for movement. Every eye flicked at shadows. But no pursuit came. The landing opened around us, the river channel dark and frozen, the stacks of timber standing like grey walls. We dragged Eli to the log pile and laid him on a folded coat. His ankle was swollen to double its size. Jude coughed until he spat blood into the snow. Baptiste's shoulder hung wrong, his shirt dark with blood. Eor stood bent over, hands on his knees, fighting for breath. Pike leaned on his axe. He scanned the tree line and the high ground behind us. "We stay here tonight," he said. "No going back, no cutting. We keep the fire high." His voice shook once, but then steadied. "If they come, we meet them here where there's room." Nels and the cookhouse sled had not come down yet. My stomach dropped with the thought. Pike must have seen it on my face. "They'll follow at first light," he said. He did not sound certain. The oxen shifted in the traces, restless. The smell of blood carried far on the cold air. We built the fire high in the center of the landing, dragging kindling from the log pile. Flames rose and threw long shadows across the ice. Men huddled close, every head snapping at each sound from the trees. The wounded lay near the heat, groaning in low breaths. Pike walked a wide circle, never letting his eyes rest. The night pressed down. At intervals we heard the calls from the swamp. Deeper now, more than two voices, moving in patterns around us. Each time they called, the oxen moaned and tugged at their yokes. Baptiste whispered prayers in French, his words stumbling, broken by pain. Jude stared into the fire, his face blank, eyes wide. Voss sharpened his axe with small, nervous strokes that scraped louder than the fire's crackle. I sat with my hands on my knees, heart beating hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. My thoughts turned back to Silas, swallowed by the dark beyond the cedars. I knew then he had not died clean or quick. The way those creatures moved, the weight of their hands told me so. I wanted to shut the thought away, but it held steady and cold. The fire hissed as snowflakes fell into the flames. Somewhere in the black trees, a branch cracked under weight. It did not fall. It stayed pressed until it broke. The sound echoed. Pike raised his axe and faced the dark. "They're watching," he said. His voice was low, meant only for us, and we waited for them to move. The fire burned high, but the warmth could not keep the fear from creeping in. Every man leaned forward, eyes darting to the tree line. The silence stretched, broken only by the pop of sap in the wood. Eli shifted and winced, his ankles swollen and angry under the cloth wrap. Baptiste sat with his back to the log pile, his good hand pressed to his ruined shoulder, his lips moving without sound. Jude held the peavey tight across his lap, his breath short and uneven. The calls came again. This time they were closer, layered over each other. 3 voices at once, one high, one low, and one broken between the two, like a throat catching. The sound ran along the length of the trees, circling, never in one place long enough to fix. The oxen panicked, pulling until their yokes strained. I cursed and tried to calm them, but their eyes showed the whites and they bawled in terror. Pike stepped to the fire and threw on more wood. Sparks shot upward, lighting his face in sharp angles. "They want us to break," he said. "Stay tight. They'll wait until one of us runs." His eyes swept over Jude, then Voss, then me. He knew which of us were nearest to snapping. Minutes dragged. Then a crash of branches split the dark behind the log pile. Men whipped around. Lantern light caught a shape moving just beyond reach, low and fast. Jude shouted and lunged to his feet, his peavey raised. Pike barked his name, but too late. Jude ran into the shadows, swinging wild. The sound of his boots hit the snow, then silence. We held still, waiting for his return, the fire at our backs. Then came the scream. It was short and cut off in the middle. After that, only the high cry of something not human answered, rising over the trees. Voss cursed and started forward, but Pike blocked him with the flat of his axe. "No more," Pike said, his voice sharp. "He's gone." Voss's face twisted, but he did not push past. He dropped back to the fire, his hands shaking so badly his axe slipped in his grip. We sat again, the weight of what had just happened settling heavy. The smell of iron drifted faint on the cold air. I clenched my fists against my knees and tried to keep my eyes on the fire. I wanted to believe Jude was still alive out there, but the scream had left no doubt. Hours passed. No attack came. Only the calls, circling, testing, waiting. Men dozed in short jerks, waking at each sound. Pike never sat. He walked the circle of the fire, steady and silent, his axe always in his hand. When the first grey light touched the river ice, we moved. Pike gave the order without ceremony. "Back to town," he said. "We'll leave the timber. The company can send another crew." No one argued. We packed what little we had left. Eli was lifted onto a sled, his face pale but his jaw set. Baptiste could barely use one arm, but he walked, his eyes hollow. Eeyore lashed the oxen tight, speaking to them low. Voss tied his axe to his belt with a strip of cloth so he would not lose it if he fell. I carried the last lantern, its light weak in the pale dawn. The path out ran long through the swamp edge. None of us wanted to pass it, but there was no choice. The trees leaned heavy with snow, and each gust shook down a fine fall that masked sound and sight. We moved quick but held the line close. Every man looked at the brush as much as at the trail. Halfway through the cedar stand, the oxen balked. They snorted and refused to step. Pike pushed forward to drive them on. That was when the shapes appeared. Three at once, standing in a loose half-circle ahead, tall, wide, and wrong. Their eyes caught the light, pale and flat. They did not move at first. They only watched. The oxen bawled and lunged sideways, almost overturning the sled with Eli on it. Hare fought the yoke, his boots digging into the snow. Voss shouted. Baptiste raised his hook in his one good hand. My lantern trembled, the flame fluttering weak. The middle shape stepped forward. Its breath fogged out in steady bursts. Its hands opened and closed. The claws caught the dawn light. Pike raised his axe and shouted once, wordless. His voice echoed through the swamp. For a moment, nothing moved. Then they came. The first hit Pike square, knocking him back. His axe swung but caught only hide, cutting deep but not stopping the weight. The second rushed Baptiste, claws sinking into his chest before he could swing. He cried out once, then was lifted clear off the ground, blood running hot down the creature's arm. The third went for the oxen, teeth snapping, sending them crashing into the sleds. Eli rolled off, screaming as his injured ankle struck the ground. I stumbled back, my lantern falling and dying in the snow. Voss roared and drove his axe into the side of the one holding Baptiste. The blade sank and the creature turned on him, releasing Baptiste's limp body. Hare swung his yoke pin like a club, striking the head of the one attacking the oxen. The sound was bone against iron. It staggered but did not fall. Pike was on his feet again, axe red, face grim. He struck again and again, each blow heavy, each breath ragged. One creature went down, thrashing. The others closed in tighter. Eli dragged himself through the snow toward the trees, his face twisted with pain and terror. I reached for him, but something moved between us, tall and fast. It bent low and Eli's cry cut short. When it rose again, he was gone in its arms. The fire from the landing seemed a lifetime away. Only the breaking of wood, the cries of men and the low snarls of the things filled the swamp. I knew then we would not all see the road out. Pike drove his axe into the ribs of the creature before him, but the thing hardly slowed. It twisted its head and snapped its jaws close to his face. Pike wrenched the blade free, his arms trembling with the force. Voss leapt beside him, striking the same beast with his axe in a downward hack that split flesh and splattered blood across the snow. The creature shuddered and fell hard, but another pressed in from the side, forcing them back toward the sled. Baptiste lay still where he had been dropped. His chest did not rise. His eyes stared open, already frosted at the edges. Orr shouted his name once, but did not stop swinging his yoke pin. He struck one beast across the shoulder and broke bone with a crack that rang in the cold air. The blow staggered it, but it did not fall. It turned its head slowly toward Eeyore, its lips curling back over yellow teeth, blood trailing down its thick arm. Jude was gone. Eli was gone. Baptiste lay dead. That truth settled like lead in my chest as I lifted the peavey I had dropped and stepped to Eeyore's side. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold it straight. The beast rushed him, claws high, but I jammed the spike into its thigh with everything I had. The iron sank deep and the creature howled, staggering sideways. Eeyore swung hard at its jaw and the head snapped back with a sickening crack. It crumpled to the snow, twitching once before going still. The last beast circled Pike and Voss. It was larger than the others, shoulders broad, arms hanging longer than a man's. Its breath steamed in great clouds, its chest heaving, its eyes fixed on the two men who stood bloodied but standing firm. Pike raised his axe, but his arm shook with exhaustion. Voss spat blood from his split lip and squared his stance, both hands white-knuckled on his axe handle. The creature lunged, faster than either could react. It slammed into Voss and carried him down. Snow burst up around them. Voss roared, swinging wild, but the beast pinned him with one arm and raked across his chest with the other. The sound of tearing cloth and flesh turned my stomach. Voss screamed once, then fell silent as the creature tore into him. Pike struck from behind, burying his axe in its back. The creature reared up with a guttural cry, twisting, the axe still lodged deep. It swung an arm and struck Pike square in the chest. He flew back, landing hard on the ice near the sled, breath driven from his body. He tried to rise but collapsed again, clutching his ribs. Orr and I stood alone. My breath came fast and shallow. The peavey in my hands felt like nothing against the mass of muscle and claw before us. The beast turned toward Pike, dragging Voss's limp body half-crushed in the snow. It bent low, jaws opening wide. I shouted without thinking, a raw sound that tore my throat. The creature's head lifted toward me. Its eyes caught mine, cold, flat, empty. I charged, spike raised, and drove it with all the strength I had into its side. The iron slid between ribs. The beast roared, twisting, clawing at the wound. Eeyore ran in and slammed his yoke pin against its skull. Once, twice. The second blow cracked bone. The creature staggered, swung a heavy arm and caught Eeyore across the neck. He dropped without a sound. I tore the peavey free and struck again, high into its throat. Blood poured black against the snow. The creature collapsed to its knees, gurgling, its eyes still fixed on me. It swayed once, then toppled face first into the snow, the ground shaking with its weight. The silence that followed rang in my ears. Only my ragged breath broke it. The fire from the landing was long behind us. The swamp lay still, holding its secrets in the cold dawn. Pike groaned from where he lay, clutching his ribs. He dragged himself upright against the sled, his face pale and drawn. He looked at the bodies of the men scattered around us. His eyes held no words. There were two of us left. The oxen, maddened by the fight, had broken free and fled. The sleds lay wrecked, one overturned, one half smashed. Tools and supplies were scattered, stained red against the snow. The tree line loomed dark and silent now, but I knew it was not empty. The calls had stopped, but that silence was worse. It felt as if eyes still watched, waiting for the last of us to stumble. Pike pressed a hand to his side and forced himself to his feet. "We move," he rasped. "Now." I nodded, though my legs felt ready to give. I lifted the peavey again, slick with blood, and turned toward the road out behind us. The snow already began to cover the bodies, and in the stillness of the swamp, the silence did not feel like safety. It felt like the pause before another hunt. We walked on, two broken men leaving behind the timber, the dead, and the memory of voices that would never leave my ears. That winter, I made it back to town. Pike did too, though his ribs never healed right. We never spoke of what we saw to outsiders. Not to the company, not to the families of the men who never returned. They said wolves or a bear. We let them believe it. But I know what I saw in the cedar swamp, And when the wind rises at night, carrying a cry that holds two voices at once, I still hear it.